Hello again, Dr. Flight, round three now as we're talking about products, product development. Um, what happens now once a product is developed is the product goes into commercialization through launch. So we start offering the product or service or offer. And as a result, we want to think about this product as it um, goes over time, as we manage it over a period of time. So in traditional marketing, we think of products as having something called a life cycle, which would be a period of time for the product to grow in sales, to have competitors come in and try to copy us or copy the pioneer who created the product to begin with. And then over a period of time, though, the market becomes exhausted. In other words, the market is eliminated, and as everybody purchases the product, there's fewer and fewer people to sell to. And also, new challenges emerge, like new products come up to compete against the product that was originally launched. Again, new competitors come up, changes are made to the products, modifications are made. So the reality is that once a product launches, that only begins its life cycle. And the life cycle has four stages that we think of as needing to be managed through. So this talk today walks through the traditional four stages of the product life cycle. We also spend a little bit of time talking about different types of consumers who purchase throughout the life cycle. So you can think of innovators, early adopters, folks who buy, the majority of people who buy in the middle of the life cycle curve, and then the last group would be laggards. So we talk a little bit about them as well. So the product life cycle, and then some of the changes that take place in our managerial approach as the product travels through the life cycle, and finally some of the changes that we observe in our consumers when thinking about people who buy first when the product's first launched, compared to those who buy last when the product is towards the end of its life cycle. All right, so offer life cycle. Thanks for listening, and again, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks. All right, so many of you are familiar with what we call the product life cycle, and if you've had principles of marketing, then you've certainly seen this concept. And so four stages demark different characteristics of how the market reacts and how managers manage a product and its sales or demand over periods of time. Now, this model here shows introduction, growth, maturity, and decline, and those stages are oftentimes illustrated through total sales, or what we might also call demand for a product within a product category. You'll see that it starts out at some fairly small amount and then grows over time, reaching some type of a peak during maturity, and then begins to decline, and sales begin to decline after that. So different characteristics again happen over time. The other thing that you're going to want to be aware of here on this chart is the total profit chart. And note that when the product is first launched, we have a negative amount. So we're actually losing money on a product industry-wide when it's first launched. And then eventually we break even with a certain number of units that are sold. And then profit tends to peak out towards the very end, the last portion of the growth stage. And it remains rather high even through maturity, and then it only begins to decline, of course, towards the latter part of its life cycle. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just walking through each of these little steps, and then we'll also talk about the different types of consumers who buy during these periods as well. So to look at each stage individually, we're going to walk through this specific chart and we're going to look at some characteristics that are associated with the introduction, the growth, maturity, and then finally the decline stage. So we'll just spend a minute or two talking about each one of these. So to begin with, we're going to talk about introduction. And again, this is this introduction stage here in the product life cycle, and we have these characteristics of the product. So new product development leads then to the launch and the introduction of the product. Proper market testing helps that we have a successful launch and that the product takes off instead of declines. And so that's kind of a big deal here. We may have some failure that happens, but if we've done a lot of market research in advance, then we're not going to be concerned. We'll be concerned less about a product failure. We'll feel very confident that the product will succeed if we've tested a lot. Many products don't make it out of the introduction phase. Some of the causes for this may be poor or insufficient advertising. A lot of times we just don't do enough to make people aware of our offer. So if you're a nonprofit and you want to offer a new service, you got to make sure people know about it. And that's a big deal because a lot of nonprofits don't want to put money into advertising or awareness building activities. So we need to make sure that we're pumping enough money into the awareness portion of our communication plan so that a new product or service is known to the marketplace for a lot of nonprofits. And again, the other thing which we mentioned already is that the initial setup costs and the initial research and development, the initial preparation for the launch of the new product or service means that we're operating from a negative revenue perspective. We're not making a profit early on in the product life cycle and during the early stages of introduction. So profits here we could think of are negative. Sales, of course, increase at an increasing rate. Our goal is going to be to get people to buy and know about the product. So this communication piece down below, informing customers is what we want to make sure that we're doing in this particular stage to push it into the next stage and to push sales upward and get that motivating trend towards the right direction. The second stage is the growth stage. So in the growth stage, we are experiencing increasing sales at an increasing rate up until a point where we kind of have an inflection point in this curve. And at that point, we start to increase at a decreasing rate. So a lot of times we have new competitors entering the marketplace at this particular time. This is, of course, a challenge for us because these competitors see that the product is becoming more popular because of sales, so they want to jump into this product category to try to rise this star up and really take advantage of its popularity. So increased pressure then pushes, increased competition pushes pressure on us to either compete on price or do some direct competitive advertising to counter this type of pressure from competition. So we may need to reduce prices a little just to be competitive in the light of new competition coming in. But we want to encourage loyalty. We want people to become repeat purchasers and things of that nature. Again, towards the end of this stage, we see profit as something that emerges, but we've had to be fairly patient up until this time. Early in the product life cycle, remember, we were losing money. Now we're making money, and our peak profit tends to happen at some point towards the end of the growth stage. The other thing that happens right at the end here of the growth stage, which is not marked here, but there's something called the shakeout period. Towards the end of the growth stage, there are a bunch of competitors who jumped into the product category, but now are being forced out. They're being shaken out of the product category because of the intense competition that's happening. So there's actually, you know, competitors come in, but then also competitors leave because they don't want to, you know, deal with all the competition that's there. The third stage is the maturity stage. So the maturity stage is a wonderful period of time. We sometimes call products in this stage cash cows, because we're able to take our profit and we're able to add it to other projects that we have within the organization, or within the company. So sales are peaking at this particular time. Profit has already peaked and is still extremely high. We want to begin to add lots of variations or secondary products. We might even do substitute or products that are going to be cannibalistic, where we offer a new generation, maybe another service. We update the old service. We do second and third generation type things to increase and motivate consumers. We do advertising to remind customers that we're still in the market, and to remind them to come back. And again, from a nonprofit perspective, remember, we have people who behave initially once, like you joined the gym at the beginning of the month, the YMCA, but now it's 3 months later, and we need to remind you to come back to continue your workouts, to continue your exercising or diet or whatever it is that you've been working on this entire time. So certainly those are the types of things that we want to be able to do. We want to continue to capture the market. Remember, in the maturity stage, there's still a huge percentage of the market that has not bought your product or service yet. So if you think about it, you're still talking at probably 50–60% of the market that still has not bought yet or used your product. So there's no reason to abandon your product or abandoning the marketplace just because the product's in maturity. Now's the time to capture the rest of the market and be able to grow from the financial success that you've been able to realize by having a good, strong final product. So this revenue then is used to help fund other organizational projects, because you have, again, what we call a cash cow that's helping fuel the engine of what else you're doing. The final stage is the decline stage. Now, a lot of people don't feel great about the decline stage. We see obviously decreasing sales, and so some firms want to jump out of that product. Remember, 16% or so, or 13 to 16% of the market is still buying during this period of time. So there's still money there, and there's still profit being made. So there's still profit, that's there. While the profit is not growing, it's still there, and you can still make money, of course, in this particular product area. So, so firms will help or try to reduce pricing, maybe try to remain profitable. They'll reduce costs for sure. We'll limit or reduce the number of product variations that we have. We still want to remain profitable, right, until the product is eliminated eventually. But we want to make sure that we're, realize that we still have customers. The laggards are still being served here at this time. So that kind of rounds up the four categories, the four life cycle categories. The next thing I just want to mention here in a moment, you look at the curve that happens here, and you see kind of this upward motion, and then a peak, and then a downward motion. So I know the drawing here is kind of like a normal distribution almost. Keep in mind though that this is not necessarily the way all firms' sales look, and it certainly doesn't mean that this is the way they look for all for all industries either. Individual product life cycles may vary across the organization, across businesses, but then importantly across industries as well. So the traditional kind of hourglass or traditional bell shape type thing that we're looking at on a product life cycle curve is not always the way it looks. We have different shapes that are displayed here. We have one here where we launched the product, and then what probably happened was a technology of some type came along, or a new product version came along, which caused the product life cycle to start over again. So it kind of got launched over again. And then there's probably another product launch somewhere in here. And so multiple generations of products will cause a curve that looks kind of like this. We may have another situation in the second box here where we have some seasonality, where we have some peaks, and then we have some valleys here. So these will be maybe seasonal issues or cyclical, if not seasonal, where over periods of time, like the economy was growing, then the economy shrank, then the economy was growing again. So there are variations that are going on in here that could cause some disruptions, a cyclical pattern then that could cause some disruptions along the way. Fads or products that increase extremely fast and then decrease extremely fast would be fad-like items as well. So these are non-traditional product life cycle curves that you might see, and so just be aware that those are certainly there. That brings us up to the last element that we're going to talk about. There are 5 different types of consumers that we have studied and that mark the different stages of the product life cycle curve. And so again, if you've had principles of marketing, then you're familiar with these groups. So this is not new for folks who've already had a marketing class. This is drawn from consumer behavior, and it's this idea that different types of different consumers behave differently across the different stages of the product life cycle curve. And this chart here actually does draw these different types of groups more stringently on a normal distribution with a peak and such. But it's broken up into 5 groups, as I said. Innovators then are the first group. They're the people who buy the product most and are, generally speaking, the most risk-loving. They like to try new products, and they're very invested in the product category. The early adopters are heavy opinion leaders. They're ones who they're still willing to pay a price premium. They're willing to be first with the product, but their information is very important to the rest of the market. So they will likely be ones who are references that others look to for information about the product category. And again, they are innovative. They like new products. They like to be first with a product. Early majority and late majority consumers make up the middle portion. Almost 70% of the market is in this middle portion here between the early and late majority folks. So if you recall, this is going to be during the late growth stage and the early or all the way through the early decline stage of the product life cycle. So remember that maturity stage, that's a good time to have a product. You're making a lot of money and you're serving a lot of customers. These folks are more price sensitive. They're a little bit more risk averse as well. They certainly are more so than the early adopters were. And they're growing in that way between the start of the early majority and the end of the late majority, which then finally leads us up to the laggards. And again, 16% of the market, anywhere from 13 to 16% of the market is here. So there are a lot of folks still wanting to buy the product, but they're resistant to change. They want something that's tried and true, and they don't want a lot of risk associated with the products that they already have and have available to them. So that brings us up to the summary, just the wrap up here. We just want to be clear about what we're doing. The product life cycle, then in the life cycle curve is what we looked at initially, along with the product life cycle stages. 4 different stages mark the life cycle from introduction through growth, through maturity, and then decline. And there are very specific managerial aspects of each stage that we want to think about. We also looked at non-traditional product lifecycle curves, which may not take the traditional normal distribution type of a look, which we normally see with a product lifecycle chart. And then finally, what we had was the 5 different adopter groups. Just a quick description of those. You should be aware of what those are and when they come in the product life cycle. And you should be able to say a word or two about some of the characteristics of each of those. Okay, so this has been then the product life cycle, managing the offer through its life cycle, and within the context of a nonprofit. Now, again, the way we phrased this, much of this work comes from for-profit organizations, and the same principles really carry over to a great degree for a nonprofit in this case, where we have different offers that last periods of time. We need to rejuvenate them to build up sales towards the middle of the product life cycle curve, and then we want to replace them eventually as they go into the decline stage. So to this, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to talking to you and hearing from you. Thanks.